Lord, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in your sight this morning. Amen. The thing that most people pay attention to in today's story about Mary visiting Elizabeth is the song that Mary sings when Elizabeth welcomes her. My soul magnifies the Lord. She sings, and many of us remember this song as the Magnificat. The funny thing is, many of us somehow got the impression that the stories about Mary meant that she was a very submissive, obedient, almost subservient woman. Sort of the ultimate good Catholic schoolgirl. If she'd grown up in the 50s and 60s, her uniform skirt would never have been above her knee. Her blouse would have always been freshly pressed, and she would have gone downstairs for Mass every morning instead of doing last-minute homework during optional study hour. The whole thing about being pregnant and unwed, well, that would have been a problem for sure. But then again, she was the Blessed Virgin Mary. Or as Reverend Catherine Matthews penned, the BVM. More than anyone else, young girls were supposed to strive and be just like her. You know, submissive, obedient, maybe even subservient. As Christians, we generally believe Mary's pregnancy fulfills God's promise of a Messiah, and that Elizabeth gave birth to the prophet that would prepare the way for that Messiah. Well, these tidbits aside, Mary and Elizabeth could be seen as two ordinary pregnant women in the most extraordinary time and circumstances, on the brink of greatness, but first tending to their relationship with each other and with God. Motherhood is daunting to every woman, especially the first time around. And these two women have found themselves pregnant under most unusual and unexpected circumstances. One way too old to conceive, and the other an unwed young girl. Can we really be surprised then that they would get together to offer each other comfort and support during this crazy, mixed up time in their lives? Don't you wonder what these two ordinary women must have felt about the extraordinary things that were happening to them? The wonderful priest writer Henry Nouwen wrote beautifully about this passage from the Gospel of Luke. He focuses not on the big, though, historic things that were happening, but on the meeting of these two women on a dusty road. Two women coming together to share their ancient womanly experience of being with child. Nouwen wrote, "Who could ever understand? Who could ever believe it? Who could ever let it happen?" But Mary says, "Let it happen to me." And she immediately realizes that only Elizabeth will be able to affirm that yes. For 3 months, Mary and Elizabeth lived together and encouraged each other to truly accept the motherhood that was given to them unexpectedly. Let it happen to me? Truly accept? Okay, she's starting to sound a lot like that Catholic schoolgirl again. But maybe not. It's one thing for Mary to have accepted her call to be the mother of Jesus, but it's a whole other thing to see her as submissive. I mean, when you really read this story closely, And listen to the song. She is talking about nothing less than revolution. The people in power, the comfortable, are going to be laid low. And the poor and the pressed down will be lifted up and filled with good things. Now, Mary didn't make that up. This was the ancient story and song of her people and her faith. Those promises of a God who loves and cares for every single one of God's children and doesn't take well to selfishness, to greed, to oppression. The tables are going to be turned, or maybe overturned is a better way of putting it. God remembers the people and the promises God has made, and this causes Mary to burst forth into song. So this Magnificat, this canticle, this song of Mary sings a resistance of an energetic faith like the one that sustained her grandmothers through the ages, an energetic and persistent faith that insisted that God would be true to God's promises, justice and healing and compassion. These are important things to Mary, the good Jewish girl, and so we shouldn't be surprised when they are just as important to the boy she raises. You might say that Jesus is a lot like his mother, ready to look danger in the eye for the sake of faithfulness to God's promises. Both Mary and Elizabeth are strong, gutsy women who raised their extraordinary sons to be leaders and teachers and troublemakers in the eyes of the powerful, the comfortable, the well-fed, powerful who will be brought down by the songs like the one that Mary sings. Both Mary and Elizabeth know this story and the hope that have kept their families alive and together for thousands of years, even through the worst of oppression. And they know the song of their people, the music of hope, that someday the world will be put right, and they know that this moment is the moment of that promise, that all these things are about to begin, that the promises are beginning to unfold right before their eyes. My heart aches, as I know yours do too, for the suffering of people now in places both far and close at hand, in places like Yemen and Syria and Palestine and the Sudan, and here in this city, families plagued with poverty and destroyed by the opioid epidemic, left with no home, with no hope. And so too, even in many of our own homes, there are children and elderly people and so many other vulnerable people whose experiences need to be honored, whose songs need to be heard. I know we feel overwhelmed at times by the suffering and sorrow of this world. I know I do. And yet we've been shown a way and offered a promise. If those of us who are well-fed and comfortable, those of us who have power and who have a voice, get out of our comfort zones regularly and listen to the stories and the songs and the experiences of others who are not so well-fed, who live on the edge, who feel pressed down. Basically, honoring their experience and the pain. That is the beginning of reconciliation, healing, and peace. And aren't those the things that we are all looking for deep down at Christmas time? It's through relationship and community that we're healed. That relationship, that community, is the way that we can keep our hearts open to see one another. That relationship, that community, is the place where we grow our faith in God and help one another listen for how God is still speaking in our lives. What song is being sung? It's the place where we wait together for the promises of God to be fulfilled. That relationship, that community, is the way that we honor one another's experience, affirm one another's gifts, watch over one another, and hold each other up when we need it. That relationship, that community, is the path that we take to righting the wrongs of this world, to repairing the damage that's been done, and to dreaming of a better way for all of God's children to live. Here, in this Advent season, pregnant with hope, we know that in the days ahead we're going to watch for the promises of God to unfold in our lives and the life that we share in community. We're going to help one another search for meaning, and we're going to share our stories, sing our songs together, walk alongside one another, and sometimes we're just going to sit in the dark, quiet, and wait together, trusting in the promises of God, listening for a word from God. And in the midst of our waiting, as Elizabeth and Mary sang God's praise, we too will sing and rejoice, our hearts dancing within us. God's promises are true. There's a song of hope, peace, joy, and love in the air. Can you hear it? Amen.